everybody. So if it has to be development, it has to be a value-based one, and it has to have the principle of distributive justice. So when this concept came up, so development initially started in the after the World War II, and that industrialized development, everything started taking a big question mark. People started questioning what we were doing to our, especially the resources, the environmental resources that were getting spoiled a lot. If you to quote the example, like for instance, if you look at the agricultural practices that we were having those days, it was a complete ecosystem in itself, self-sufficient ecosystem. Like if you look at the crops, so it used to be standing in stagnant water. So because of that, we had a lot of frogs. We had, and then we had when the frogs were there, there were a lot of fishes, and the ecosystem was self-sufficient, and we did not have to look for fodder once the agricultural harvest took place. And what was the outcome was we were self-sufficient in our requirements for the entire ecosystem. But when the concept of westernized concept of cultivation came in, they came and said, "See, look at your crops. If I put this fertilizer, it will just die because it's not having the capacity to withstand all these, good practices." So our farmers were so innocent; they believed it, and when they practiced all this, slowly we found that we have totally lost the cultivability of the land, and there has been a thorough exploitation. So development was not development as we wanted it. So in that situation came the concept of women in development. The development process affects men and women in different ways. The woman is very closely in working with the environment. She is the one who is in the forest. She is the one who is providing for the family. So there is very much required that the women have to be part of this development. Whenever there has been a conflict, we have found protest by the women. The Chipko movement, for instance, all of us have studied as social work students. What is the Chipko movement? That was when women showed the protest that development did not suit their needs because they were in love and they were in close unison with the environment and interaction with the environment. So everybody, I mean, the entire people discourse of the development started understanding that development process affects men and women in different ways. So when the development discourses started taking place, the various United Nations initiatives like women conferences took place. One took place in Mexico City, one took place in Copenhagen, Nairobi, Beijing. All these things put the gender perspective firmly in the development agenda. If not for those discourses, we would not have had gender in the development agenda because people understood, the experts understood, the activists understood that the absence of gender equality will mean a huge loss for the human race because it had cost for both men and women and also for development. We'll see how it is affecting in the slides to come. We'll see how the development, that is lopsided development, will affect the entire community. We have it all. Even now, we are having numerous examples. The Narmada Bachao Andolan is an example. So we have many examples which are not maybe known to us, which are telling us the importance of equality in development. And I'm just going important, landmarks in international perspectives. That is, the project-wise and the outcome-wise. We started as early as 1950 with the welfare approach, and then we moved on by 1995, mid-1990s, and the approach was towards empowerment. We'll see how it shifted. So initially, the focus was on welfare because the problem that was seen as women's problem was women's poverty, women's special needs, women as a vulnerable group. So then, the solution we thought was to provide support services for health, for nutrition and childcare. So how did they provide it? There was maternity clinics, immunization campaign. If you remember 1950s, there was a lot of immunization campaigns that came up. We were all beneficiaries to that. I'm sure we all have those immunization injections with us. Feeding was also another important initiative. So the welfare was a charity approach, providing an assistance, more of an assistance mode in the specific points of intervention. 1960, we started moving towards economic self-reliance because people started understanding it's no point in just providing charity. We have to, because we understand the concept of work. Women, there are 4 W's that are always discussed. Women, work, water, and waste. And women are involved in management of all these 4 concepts, and women were never unemployed. They were working. They had their own right to work. So whenever we engage in this work in women, we find that we have somehow denied the women. You find the decline of the women in the workforce. The recent data tells you that in India, the workforce participation of women is declining. Why? Because we have taken away their jobs, which are mostly agrarian, towards more industries. To give you a simple example, let us say a woman has a small piece of land and she's working on it and she's tilling her land and she's also able to provide for her family, probably some economy for her family also. But what happens? Now she's educated her daughter. Daughter has studied 10th or 12th standard, and the daughter does not want to get into an agricultural job. She wants to go and take up a office job. But because they are in a village, accessibility is a problem. So the mother is worried about the safety of the daughter. So the daughter, after education, is sitting at home. So somewhere we have made women, lose their jobs. The economic self-reliance concept even now is a question mark. But early as 1960s, people understood that women are underemployed. People are unproductive. They are dependent. To promote the self-reliance and independence, they started with the income generation programs. There are a lot of NGOs that worked with that. Even today, you find institutions like Seva working a lot on this economic self-reliance. And the Seva is a wonderful case study example. I request or urge the students to study more about Seva, Self-Employed Women's Association. It's a beautiful example. Like so, how they, for instance, how they worked on the literacy requirements. Women are illiterate and they did not know how to like when they had to open bank accounts, they have to um, have the photograph with the so they said ask the women to stand with the photograph and a slate with the phone number with the address written on that, and that was clicked and put on the passbooks. So that was how they were trying to make the women self-reliant. The next shift came in 1970 when they understood that men they are in need of skills. So that is why the efficiency has to be improved. So they started giving inputs into improving the skills of the women and also providing credit in 1985, the approach was towards equality. That was the first major step because wherever the structural inequality is there, there will be the discrimination will be very strong. Discrimination against women in schooling, credit, access to land, etc. That was a major structural inequality that had to be corrected. So what they did was they implemented equal opportunity for women in schooling, and affirmative actions came up, reservations. The affirmative action means reservations, enforcement of various the laws that were meant for women that started in 1985 itself. There were laws made for women. I mean, not exclusively for women, but provision was made for the women. And I'm talking about the international scenario. Then we moved on to empowerment in mid 1995, that is unequal gender power relations. So from then on, we are in this empowerment where the perspective has shifted to rights perspective. From where we started from charity, now we are with the rights perspective, and we are expanding women's participation. So now there is a lot of discussion on women's participation in work, women's participation in gender discourse, women's participation in development. Because we have to mobilize, mobilization for collective action, strategies for conscientization, and more towards democratic practices and involvement of women in political action. Because that's where once you're involved in politics, once the power is there, that's where you can bring in the permanent change. It looks like an oxymoron, permanent change, but that is how women get the power to bring development for themselves. From letting others choose, now they have to choose for themselves what they want as development. So the grassroots involvement has been very high in this particular phase. So this is how we are moved in the international scenario on development of women. We started with in 1950s with the uh, welfare model. Now we are in the empowerment model, and it's been really successful. There's a lot of work that is going on, which you also know as students. Okay, then we'll move on to a lot of this, concepts that came up as women in development, women and development, gender and development. So you must have. I'll just put up the photograph for you. Esther Bosera. She's an economist. She's written a lot on the women in development. The most often read book, I think 2007 or 17, it was republished. Women's Role in Economic Development. It's a beautiful book which we must all read. And she was the one who emphasized that development affected men and women in different ways. And her book talks about how women's role will be useful in the economic development. So this, she was an academician as well, and this work of hers was an important pointer for further cues for women's development. And that was when people started talking about women's exclusion from development without even knowing, without even then realizing that they are not there in the development discourse, they have been set aside. So therefore, the Women's Committee in Washington, D.C., for the first time, they used the term WID, Women in Development, and the approach came to prominence to include the development in the early 1970s. So what it is doing is it is trying to integrate the overall development processes and policies. So we must have first, women should be the center spread of any development discourse. That was the claim from Esther Bosa. So for further information, you can read her book on women's role in economic development. Okay, and next came women and development. So in the here, what earlier the first mention began with women in development, but what the people started realizing is yes, women is there in the development discourse, but unequal terms. Very very less representation is there, and so they started demanding that women should have decision making power. See, always only when you have the power to make decisions, there is equal participation. Participation means what? Like to give the example of a rural camp, starting from a small example which all of us can understand. See, when we decide, let us say from our department, when we decide on a rural campsite, we make it very participatory and democratic, which means we take our students with us and then we tell them these are the parameters. If you have any other parameters, you can add it also. You see for yourself whether you will be willing to work in this area as a, you need to choose this area as a campsite. So the minute we are made participants to this decision making, the ownership is already there. So when the ownership is there, the success of the program is ensured. Same way, the development projects have to succeed. Firstly, we have to involve women in the decision making process. They should have the power of making decisions, and that is how the women's interest can be upheld. So far, what was happening is it is the male who is deciding what the women needs. So probably they don't understand or empathize the exact need of women's interests. And WAD argued that class structures, that was when the concept of class structure came in, and they brought out a beautiful, valid point that amongst the marginalized women, it could be marginalization based on caste, marginalization based on race, based on economic strata, whatever, or based on the occupation that they are doing, like we have in India. But what they were saying is, marginalized women had more in common with their men folk compared to the women of another class. So that was a very important point that came up, that there has to be more involvement of the marginalized women in the development discourse. That was what WAD spoke about. And then came up gender and development. So the concept of gender came in a big way during the 1980s. And that was also because probably, the United Nations had declared that decade as decade of women development. So that was when there was a lot of research that came in, and gender discourses, gender sensitization started off in a big way. And it was a revolutionary way, gender and development, because it refocused the emphasis from women. The new focus was they have to improve the women's conditions by making them an integral part of every development discourse, every development program. Okay, and this was when we started the movement from efficiency to equity and empowerment. So they said that women have to be an integral part of the development programs. And from gender and development, from GAD, that was when we started talking about needs. And we have started strategizing gender needs, strategic gender needs, and practical needs. We see both what are the practical needs and what are the strategic gender needs. Practical gender needs, like day to day, what the woman needs, practically there are some inadequacies in the living conditions. For instance, we all know that women in the rural areas, I'm sure you must have visited hilly areas when you go for tribal camps. The amount of distance they have to walk for carrying water. Imagine how we have lopsided approach to development. A tribal area which is supposed to be flush with water and all the natural resources has dried up, because in the plains we are sucking all the water through the whatever systems we have, through the borewell system. We are just drawn off the level of water, so those poor women are suffering. They have to walk long distances with the potload on their heads. So there are inadequacies. So practical gender needs says that you must provide water, provide them health care. I don't know how many of you have watched women. They have to travel a lot even for their maternity. People die. There is a lot of deaths because of that, and because of improper health care. Because I'm not saying that the tribes did not know how to take care of their health. They knew, but in the name of development, we erased all that. The indigenous knowledge, we don't know where it has gone. So we have to really account for the healthcare, income earning for the household provisioning, because again we have exploited their resources, and we are not providing them alternative resources also. If you go to Narmada Bachao Andolan case study, you will see how it is actually working. And housing and basic services, displacement is in a big way. How are we going to account for it? I'm not just talking only about the private, tribal areas. I'm talking about in general women. If you go to slums, if you go to settlement colonies, how they are suffering for all these basic needs. I know that there are, the women in slums, they have major health problems because they don't have these basic facilities. Bladder control, they can't use the toilets during the broad daylight because it's open defecation. There is a lot of research into all this. So that is when this practical gender needs came up. And then the family food provision. So if the family means family is a 4-member family, so how much of the rice quantity has to be provided? All these things came up because of this practical gender needs. Then strategic gender needs, this is when we started addressing very core issues of women's development issues: sexual division of labor, abolition of sexual division of labor, equality in opportunities, alleviation of the burden of domestic labor and childcare, removal of institutional forms of discrimination, that is, right to ownership of land and property, for instance, access to credit and other resources, freedom of choice over childbearing, measures against male violence, and participation in decision making. This is considered a crucial move, strategic gender needs. And you can see, because all the points are very relevant and very valid. And for every point that is mentioned there has been, action that has been taken, which is also being taken even to this day. Especially violence, we know that so much of initiatives have been taken across the globe to prevent male violence, and that is why SGN is very important. The next, I'm sure this is all part of your syllabus. So you should be telling me more about HDI, Human Development Index, and GDI, Gender Development Index. So we all have heard of Amartya Sen and how we developed this HDI, and how the Pakistani economist Mahbub ul Haq contributed towards developing this HDI. And there is a 4 tiers of human development that is considered, and that is life expectancy, education, per capita income, all that, and then women's development also, that is there into the HDI to rank the countries. And GDI is an index designed to understand the gender equality. There's another concept, GEM, the gender empowerment measure, was introduced as part of the HDR report, that is Human Development Report, which is being brought out by the United Nations. And this HDI, GDI has added a very gender sensitive dimension, because it's addressing the gender gaps in life expectancy, education, and income. Because all of us know life expectancy, the life expectancy in India, at least women is at least 4 or 5 years more than the women, more than the men. But education and income, there is a large gender gap, which we all know is happening, because 93% of the informal sector is where our workforce is, and more women you find in this 93%, and there is no control, and it's an unorganized sector. There is no control to understand how they are paying the women workers. To give you small examples of the street vendors that we find on the roads, to give the example of construction workers, openly how women are discriminated against. Then comes a very important MDG and SDG, Millennium Development Goals, which was Millennium Development Goals till 2015, which is now rephrased into the Sustainable Development Goals. So we all have seen that. So I'm just showing you the pictorial representation in which our concern for this particular this discussion is the SDG number 5, that is gender equality. But again, I'm not being doing justice to gender, because it has to be a center spread of these sustainable goals. Gender equality has to be the center spread for all these 17 goals. Only then we can reach towards the proper sustainable development goals as we are planning to transform our world. I'm sure you have had sessions on this. It's a very interesting document. Please read it, and I'm sure you will gain a lot of insights for your future actions. Okay, and then sustainable development. I'm sure all of us have heard about Brundtland Commission. The Brundtland Commission very nicely defines sustainable development, which is very often used in social work, and which is very dear to me also. Social development is the desire for that needs, which will we are meeting the present needs without compromising for the generations, the ability of our future generations to meet their own needs. So you must have concern for your future generation in utilizing any of the resources that you're using, which is a big question mark. Are we really doing it? Even when we do social work programs, to give you a small example, in our department, whenever we have any seminars, we make it a point that we use banners, which is only cloth banner. We don't use flex banners at all as a policy, which is not easy, because cloth banners, we have to plan it is useful to sustain a dying skill. There are very few people who go for the cloth banners. So this sustainable development, I don't want to go into the details, but it consists about two concept of needs, and the essential needs, and then the limitations of the imposed by state technology. Okay. As I told you, women's close proximity with nature is an important factor in sustainable development. We have already discussed about Chipko Movement. We have already discussed about Narmada Bachao Andolan and numerous other movements when women are, consciously or unconsciously contributing a lot towards sustainable development. So it's very important that they are the center spread in these development. Thanks. So this is with regard to the international perspective. Now we move to the national perspective, evolution of women's development in India. So the principle of gender equality is there in the Indian Constitution. You'll find it in the preamble, you'll find it in fundamental rights, fundamental duties, and directive principles of state policy. The Constitution not only grants equality to women, but also empowers the state to adopt measures to for positive discrimination. Because we always talk about protective discrimination, right? The reservation policy is an example of protective discrimination. Same way, the Constitution has given the rights to the states to take action for positive discrimination. For instance, the age of women in competitive examinations. For instance, NET exam is 35, upper age limit. To give you a small example, how we are practicing positive discrimination. And India has also ratified, which means it has signed various international conventions committed to secure equal rights for women. And SEDA is very often discussed in gender discourses and women's development. That is elimination of all forms of violence against women. It is a major breakthrough which came up in 1993. See the period, 1993 and all, we've started moving towards empowerment. So that was when this came up. But all the other conventions, all the other proceedings also we have signed. That is Mexico Plan of Action, Nairobi Forward Looking 1985 Beijing Declaration as far as platform for action. All this was signed by India, and we are endorsing it unreservedly, and we are trying our best. Once we have signed it, we have to take necessary action, and that is what we are trying to do. Though, according to me, we are ignoring a lot of marginalized within the marginalized vulnerable women, such as women with disabilities, single women, women-headed households. So lots of these women which need to still find a place in the development. Okay, then came our planning commission, which which defined three areas, that is education, social welfare, and health. And in the planning commission, we started giving a lot of importance to women's development. And however, the focus was nurturing and caring mother. That was the most important focus, welfare oriented till the 6th 5-year plan. So 6th 5-year planning we started in 1950, means put 30 years till 1980 it was like that. And there was the first important committee that made a report on status of women in India towards equality report in the year 1974, which acknowledged their presence of patriarchal nature, because of which, there is a in the mainstream development process, the patriarchal presence was acknowledged for the first time officially in 1974. And there was a lot of mass movements in the late 60s and early 70s. They asked that the country has to rethink the development model. And of course, our favorite Bosirab also, because of her, the critical who showed the critical women role played in agricultural production, so in sustaining the national and international economies, was also taken up in a very big way. And, as I told you, 1975 to 85, United Nations declared the decade for women, and there was a lot of funding for research, media coverage, awareness generation programs, and gender-specific data and status reports that were done during this period. And because there's a lot of critics about the lack of women's representation in the development model, India also came in as a party, strongly as a party for women in development perspectives. But we had another important initiative specific to India, which is called the Dawn, that is the Development Alternatives for a New Era. It was a network of activists and change makers and researchers from third world. This was started in Bangalore in 1984 with a meeting of women activists. So Dawn was different from the WID. It was an Indian version, and that played an important role in connecting, apart from WID, what we can do for our country. Okay? And then we moved on to how the government of India started establishing departments, independent cells, and ministries. The Department of Women and Child Development, which is now a ministry, was set up in 1985 by the Ministry of Human Resources. It was a major step for women development. Then the National Commission for Women, it was set up as a statutory body, and the National Commission for Women Act for reviewing the legal safeguards for women. It's a very important body which is providing safe a lot of protection for women. Whenever a woman is in distress, the NCW and SCW comes up. They recommend remedial legislative measures. If you remember the Nirbhaya case, NCW played a major role in that also. And Nirbhaya case has led to a lot of policy changes. The one-stop help center, one-stop center that we have now to protect women and children and girls against any form of violence and distress. Like one-stop center, which is functioning across the country, is an outcome of the Nirbhaya case, and the NCW had a crucial role in this. Okay, and importantly, I'm going chronologically. That's why I'm talking about the amendments, 73rd and 74th amendments of Constitution of India. There's two important reservations. That is reservations for women in the local bodies, that is in panchayats and in municipalities. There is a lot of criticism. Women are just chapas. Women are just proxy for men. Men are ruling it. Men are the ones actually who are the panchayat leaders. But we must remember, whenever there is a change, initially there will be resistance. But now we are reaping the benefits of this change. We find women are genuinely into these panchayats. We find educated women giving up their jobs and being panchayat leaders. So somewhere when change has to happen, we have to face a lot of criticisms, but nevertheless, change is permanent. Okay, then in the seventh plan, WCP came up, Women's Component Plan. That was a major contribution. The government of India said 30%. We don't know how, on what basis they added 30%, but they said that not less than 30% of the funds and benefits earmarked for women for various schemes and women-related ministries and departments. And this was the first step towards gender budgeting. Now, please do not come. I don't know how many of you have heard about the concept of gender budgeting. Gender budgeting does not mean, separate budgeting on women or anything like that. Only thing is you're scrutinizing the expenditure, the actual amount that has gone for women, how much is actually being spent for the women across the not only what is earmarked for women, otherwise also, for instance, how many women employees are there? How much of the government salary is going towards women? Simple, example of gender budgeting. So this was the precursor, starting point of gender budgeting coming up in a big way in the country. But what you have to remember is, overall economic policy will succeed only if you have a philosophy of integrating women's development in overall development in a real sense of the word. And now the latest one, national policy for that. That will be one of my a few of my last slides. The national policy on empowerment of women, 2001. Now, I'm sure your college also, or some of you researchers might have contributed, because now they are asking us for feedback, because they wanted to amend it. I think 2017-19, the bill has also been tabled, or they're going to table it, because they want to amend it in a big way. But this national policy for empowerment of women, which was made in 2001, is a very comprehensive act. It talks about various objectives. The goal is to bring about advancement, development, and empowerment of women. And it has several objectives, that is creating an environment for positive economic and social policies. So this, I think, I will not go through it. You can all access it. It has around 8 or 9 objectives, very specific, very precise, that will fit to the goals. But we'll see what is the policy prescription. There are some 6 policy prescriptions, and each one has very detailed. Like, for instance, if you talk about economic empowerment, they are talking about women in industry, women in agriculture, uh, women in other employment opportunities, then women in difficult circumstances, that is women facing violence, mainstreaming gender sensitive gender perspectives in development process, social empowerment, again health, welfare, all that is there in social empowerment and decision making, how to make the women participate in decisions. It's a very lengthy, very comprehensive document, which also talks about how to implement these, prescriptions in the day-to-day lives for women's development. So, because of paucity of time, I will need one session only for national policy. So, I move on to the other last 2 slides. This is a table that I have made for your reference. Since 1954, what is the evolution of women's development in India, starting with the government schemes. So 1954, and then ICDS, important breakthrough, 1975. Of course, RMK, Rashtriya Mahila Kosh, and Swarnit, SGSY, 1999, and Janani Suraksha Yojana, 2005. This mother and child tracking system, again very important, which is effective, 2009. And Swayambhalan Yojana, 2010-11, that is pension scheme. Priyadashini scheme, 2011, self-help groups. Then this again, Sabla is again very important scheme, uh, which is addressing an issue so far which we have not really thought of, adolescent girls. And of course, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao also, that has come up. And these are some of the schemes that government has brought in for women's development. So with this, I close. Thank you very much. I'm open for other questions. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you to Christ College. Thank you, Father. And thank you, Father Dr. Jolly Andrews, Principal, Christ College. Thanks to Mrs. Rosemary T. George, HOD, Department of Social Work, Christ College, Autonomous. Thanks to Danya and thanks to Asha for the wonderful coordination. They have been really following it up with me, and they've been very patient that I have not responded on time. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Looking forward to your questions, if any. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was full of knowledge and really that is full of knowledge and really effective. And thank you, ma'am. And your session included various concepts like women and developments on practical gender based and strategic gender needs, millennium development goals, and role of women in sustainable development and various programs related to women in India. And thank you, ma'am. Now the session is open for this discussion. Participants can ask the question or type the questions in the chat box. It's time for the questions and answer. Participants, you can ask the question. Just unmute yourself and you can ask the question or type the questions in chat box.
I'm getting a lot of thank you messages. Huh? So I'm not yet to see questions. These are all students from your college, sir? Or you have participants from others outside also?
Outside also, sir, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Any clarifications?
Uh, Ma'am, hello.
Yes.
Ma'am,
Please tell me.
okay, it's my question. That's it. Rajesh, one of your slides, you mentioned about Dawan, DAWN,
Sorry? Mentioned about?
DAWN, Dawan, Dawan,
Dawn.
Dawan.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So can you please explain what is the current situation of Dawan and futures and heads and in India, what's the perspective of Dawan like that?
See, currently Dawn is working in unison with WID and the general policies that are prevalent in the country. And what they're trying to focus is on again women's empowerment through especially focusing on prevention of marginalized towards the marginalized women and prevention of atrocities and violence. That is the information I have, and I have followed it up. I think for the past last year or maybe 1 or 2 years ago. Latest, that is the latest I have. Yes.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you,
valuable
Vinod.
comment.
Yes.
Hello. Any more questions?
Yes.
Hello. Any questions? You can ask.
Ma'am, one of our participants asked you that is women empowerment is important for development.
Women empowerment is the expected outcome from development, because when we say women are empowered, then they are self-reliant, and one process will be through development. When we give them access to the resources, access, equality of access and opportunities, then only they can be self-reliant. That is the ultimate objective of all these initiatives. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Let me check the chat box.
Any more questions?
Hi, ma'am.
Hello?
Hi. This is
Hi.
Rajesh here.
Yes, Rajeshwari.
Yeah, you had mentioned the gender part and the role of women in tribal settings, in tribal
Yes.
colonies. Don't you think there is I want to know your perspective. There is a difference of women's role and how much duty or authority women has in a tribal settlement or a tribal group than the so-called mainlanders. Isn't there a difference in the authority of women in the decision making?
Yeah, see, the thing is, it depends, it differs from geographical area, each geographical area, because as a society, the tribal society, many of them are matriarchal also, because there is more power given to women. The women are the decision makers. But if you look at it, how it is translated is, you find men not participating in the economic activities. It is a woman who is then again burdened additionally with the being the breadwinner of the family also. And of course, because they are women, there is very less work sharing from the men in the domestic, household chores, like for instance, cooking or child rearing, is all again with the burden with the women. So it is so that ways it's not translating in the way it is expected, because the economic activity of the tribal woman has changed. She is no more fetching for herself. She has to come down to the plains to sell her produce, make money, and then take care of the family also. So somewhere I think this change, that has occurred in the economic activities of the women has become an additional burden for her, because she has to take care of both the domestic sphere and the work sphere. And you know how economic sphere, again, it's very unreliable, because they're mostly vendors. They're not if they're educated. I'm not talking about those women at all. I'm talking about the tribal women who are still there in their respective areas of for their and spending their time for their livelihoods. So, and the women and the men are again into all the what shall I say, substance abuse practices. Most of them are, maybe the local liquor or whatever is the tobacco chewing. All that it is there. So I think it's that question has to be addressed, because development has not touched them the way it has to be touched. Yeah. I hope I answered your question, Rajeshwari.
For the new perspective also, I haven't thought about how it translated and the burden on women. Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Malayalam isn't it? No?
Also, I have also heard few of the, especially when you mentioned the geographical part, there are tribal communities, especially in the Northeast, where the entire country or the entire tribe is purely matrilineal, where
Yes.
so the whole family fortune goes to the girl,
Yes.
and this girl, yeah. So, but not this part that you have mentioned. I haven't thought about that perspective. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. But if you look at South, I think the lifestyle, everything is really changing, right?
Yeah, right.
That was a nice discussion. Thank you, Rajeshwari.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, even thank you for your new perspective putting into it.
Thank you, Rajeshwari. Any more questions? Okay. And link for feedback is posted in the chat box window. Listeners can fill the form for the certificate. The certificate will be sent to your mail within 5 days. I think the questions are over. Any more questions?
There are two questions in the chat box, so can I just answer that? Yes, Rajeshwari, anything you have to say?
I was about to say the same, ma'am. I thought
I've just seen that. One question is, ma'am, in your opinion, is women empowerment in India going in a proper manner? That's a very dicey question, or not an easy question. But yes, first of all, the word proper is very, what shall I say, very different. It can have different perspectives. But I think, according to me, it is going the direction we wanted, because we were talking about women becoming self-reliant. I think that ways we are moving in the right direction. But yes, whenever we talk about, whenever we are in transition, we are in a transition phase. This transition phase will have its own problems, because each person or each group will have their own vested interests, and there is sharing of power. Whenever there is sharing of power, then there is a reluctance. People don't want to let go. So then there has to be in this gender discourse, there has to be involvement of both the men and the women. So that is why now we are talking about masculinities and gender, and we're involving the men, and we are saying that your role is important, because we can't ignore one important sizable population and only talk about women empowerment. It's not possible, just not possible. That is why the shift is now towards gender and masculinities, and that's why I think we will reach our goal of empowerment sooner than later, with its own hitches, because yes, there is a lot of machineries into it. We also have the legal part to it. There are a lot of laws that have been enacted to support the women. But unless and until we work together in unison, sustaining whatever you have achieved now will be a great challenge. As I told you, I'm concerned that women's participation in the workforce is declining. Why it is declining? Because when it's asked, women are concerned about safety. They don't want to travel from one region to the one area to the other for employment. So therefore, it is these are all some challenging issues. If that is addressed, I think we will be able to reach towards empowerment. And the last question, I think, is the whole world is moving towards sustainable development. In India, we already have many programs and projects for empowerment. Do you think the basic version of these programs and projects is rooted in the sustainable development? Um, yeah, we are planning at sustainable development because now, if you see, we are addressing not only women's issues. We have started, for instance, as I told you, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, and then programs for the adolescent girls. We are now, and we're trying to protect our girls, which is an important step towards sustaining our practices. For instance, the POXO Act is again a major step towards protecting our children. So all these things, because we understand that the uh, tomorrow's India depends on this young population. So I think that ways we are working towards a sustainable practices, sustainable thought. Our thoughts are good, our policies are good, but how we are going to implement that will depend upon how we are actually going to realize sustainability. Because ultimately, it is the human element. It is you and me who's going to bring the change. And if you and me are not serious about it, if you and me are playing or not, doing justice to our roles, then I think we cannot talk about sustainable practices. Okay, thank you very much. I hope I've answered your question.
Ma'am, there is a question from
Yes.
Bonsi. Is all the policies put for women empowerment are really bringing their improvement, or it make a picture that they are still vulnerable?
Vulnerability, as I told you, vulnerability again is a very broad spectrum. Vulnerability differs from one group of women to the other, but we can't say that these programs are not addressing these issues. Of course, these programs that are there are now focusing on how to reduce the vulnerability of the women who are there. But the point here is again. Uh, is it suiting the Indian needs? Are we having policies and programs which will suit India's requirements? For instance, uh, as I told you, take the case of women with disabilities. Are we addressing the issues of women with disabilities in a manner so that it will prevent their vulnerability? So far, we had nothing. Only the disability persons with disability, right? RPWD Act 2016 has a bit addressed about women with disabilities. Okay, we are not yet to start anything on single women. Like there are so many single women who are working, who are fending for themselves. Are we talking about them? We are not addressing the issues of women, elderly women. We don't have still policies. So I think going with those issues, we are still those marginalized sections of the women. We are still yet to address the vulnerability. But in general, I think we are addressing as women as a whole, as a homogeneity. If you look at it, we are addressing the vulnerability issues. We are trying to suggest measures how they can live a better life and how they can be partners to development. That is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. There is one more question. Are the women
Yes.
in Kerala better off? From Sajiv. Sajiv.
Women in Kerala better off. Of course, the Kerala development model is considered as a model which everybody wants to emulate because first the literacy rate, and then there is the sex ratio in Kerala is one that every state would like to follow because it's a wonderful example you all are setting. In every measurable parameter, I think Kerala is way ahead. That shows that women's participation is good. But otherwise, certain things I think we need to look at it more seriously, like about how, for instance, is there really gender sensitization? Are the women in Kerala, do they really consider themselves equal at par with men? All these things I think we need to address. But otherwise, I think Kerala model is often quoted as a successful model for the other states to emulate. But yes, personally, I have seen a lot of women from Kerala achieving a lot of things, and they're spearheading a lot of change in the country. But for instance, when I look at, correct me if I'm wrong, when I look at Kerala weddings, the amount of jewelry, a woman is wearing, the bride is wearing. For a state of Kerala, I think it comes in as a surprise to me, and that is for you to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. One more question from Meisha.
Yes. Yes.
Which all are the recent plans for women empowerment in India?
Recent?
Recent plans or programs for women empowerment in India?
Yeah, recent programs, as I told you, one is this uh, national policy that has come up, and there has been a lot of change with addressing women in work. For instance, this Fertility Benefit Act 2017, that is considered as an important landmark, which is encouraging women to participate in the workforce, because this was the Maternity Benefit Act 2017. It says that so far it was maternity leave period was only 12 weeks. Now it has been made as 26 weeks. Not just that, what I feel very happy is now we are acknowledging that even for adoption, even I mean I'm not a biological mother, but maybe I'm looking for surrogatory mother to have a child, or I've adopted a child. Still, I can have this 26 weeks of maternity leave. I can choose a period when I can go on leave, and it has to be granted immediately. And also, they have to provide fresh in the workplace with 4 breaks, like for feeding the child. The 4 breaks have to be provided to the mothers. I think it's a major breakthrough for women to increase their participation. Apart from that, as I discussed with you, this Beti Bachao Beti Padhao is one of the important initiatives which we all should follow. Change in the laws towards empowerment of women is also taking place. So there are numerous at various levels it is coming. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Okay, there is one more question from Lakshmi.
Yeah.
Are there any programs which makes use of indigenous knowledge of tribal community instead of serving them with the facilities they are still hesitate about?
Sorry, not that I'm aware of at a national level, but I think your Kutumbashri programs are a step towards self-reliance, as far as I understand, because there is a lot of income generation programs that are there. Apart from that, I'm sorry, I'm not aware of what are the programs for tribal women. The particular question that has been asked.
Okay. One more question: will more women participation in policy making be a solution for catering such issues and bring a bottom-up approach of development?
Absolutely. That is why the grassroots NGOs, that is what we are working at. So if you look at all that has happened, like for instance, the NCW that was established, or even the acts that have been made, there has been an active participation from the NGOs, which we consider as the grassroots. Because any policy change if it has to be sustained, it has to come from the end users. I can't sit in an AC room and make policies. It will remain in the AC room only. It will be remaining only in the shelves. That is why many policies are not. They're not understanding the difficulties in implementation. So that is why I think when there are more women who are grounded, who are actually from the ones who are going to benefit out of the particular policy should participate. That way, that you are ensuring the sustainability of the policies.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks for a long session. And
Yeah.
I think the questions are over. So it's
thank
time
you.
to wind up.
Yes.
I invite Mrs. Danya K, our faculty, for the vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am. Danya,
Good afternoon. Thank you, sir. It's my immense pleasure to deliver vote of thanks in this great occasion on behalf of our social work department. I would like to thank Dr. R. Nalini, HOD and Professor, Department of Social Work, Pondicherry University, for your enlightened talk on international and national perspectives on women development. And I express my gratitude for accepting our invitation. Thank you, ma'am. Now let me thank our respected principal, Father Dr. Jolie Andrew, for giving us all the support for conducting this webinar and your blessings message. Thank you, Father. Next, I extend my gratitude to our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Robinson Ponminecheri, Without his support, this webinar would not have materialized. Thank you, sir. I express my gratitude to our dearest HOD, Mrs. Rosemary T. George, for her valuable guidance and enthusiastic support for making this webinar a reality. Thank you, ma'am. I extend my thanks to all my colleagues for their unfailing support and coordination. Thank you all. Now, I would like to thank technical staff members who helped us unlimitedly for this webinar, especially in this current social situation. Thank you for your active participation. Thank you all. A special thanks to each and everyone who made this event a great success. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you, Raja. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. I wholeheartedly thank each one of you have gathered here. I'm sure this was a wonderful and enlightening session. And one more information: and tomorrow's session will start from 11:30 onwards, and the link will be shared later. And thank you. Link will be shared now, and thank you all. You can leave the session. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best for tomorrow's session. Bye. Can I
Thank
leave
you,
now?
ma'am. Thank you.